Rule 6. Consult the many precious promises which are written for your support and comfort in all dangers. These are your refuges to which you may fly and be safe, when the arrows of danger fly by day, and destruction wasteth at noonday. Psalm 91, verses 5 and 6. There are particular promises suited to particular cases and exigencies, and there are general promises reaching all cases and conditions. Such are these: Romans chapter 8, verse 28. All things shall work together for good. Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verse 12. Though a sinner do evil 100 times, and his days be prolonged, yet it shall be well with them that fear the Lord. 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 20. Could you but believe the promises, your hearts should be established. Could you but plead them with God, as Jacob did, Genesis chapter 32, verse 12, Thou saidst I would surely do thee good, they would relieve you in every distress. Objection. But that promise was made personally and by name to him. These are not made so to me. Answer. If Jacob's God is your God, you have as good an interest in them as he had. The Church, 1,000 years after that transaction between God and Jacob, applied that which God spoke to him as if it had been spoken to themselves. Hosea chapter 12, verse 4. He found him in Bethel, and there he spoke with us. Rule 7. Quiet your trembling hearts by recalling and consulting your past experiences of the care and faithfulness of God in former distresses. These experiences are food for your faith in a wilderness condition. Psalm 74, verse 14. By this, David kept his heart in time of danger. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 37, and Paul his. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10. It was sweetly answered by Silentiarius when one told him that his enemies waylaid him to take away his life. If God takes no care of me, how have I escaped hitherto? You may plead with God old experiences to procure new ones, for it is in pleading with God for new deliverances as it is in pleading for new pardons. Now, mark how Moses pleads on that account with God. Numbers chapter 14, verse 19. Pardon, I beseech thee, the iniquity of this people, as thou hast forgiven them from Egypt until now. He does not say, as men do, Lord, this is the first fault. Thou hast not been troubled before to sign their pardon. But, Lord, because thou hast pardoned them so often, I beseech thee pardon them once again. So, in new straits, say, Lord, thou hast often heard, helped, and saved in former fears. Therefore now, help again, for with thee there is plenteous redemption, and thine arm is not shortened. Rule 8. Be well satisfied that you are in the path of your duty, and that will beget holy courage in times of danger. Who will harm you if you be followers of that which is good? 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 13. Or, if any dare attempt it, you may boldly commit yourselves to God in well-doing. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 19. It was this consideration that raised Luther's spirit above all fear. In the cause of God, said he, I ever am, and ever shall be stout. Herein I assume this title, I yield to nothing. A good cause will bear up a man's spirit bravely. Hear the saying of a heathen to the shame of cowardly Christians. When the Emperor Vespasian had commanded Fluidius Priscus not to come to the Senate, or if he did, to speak nothing but what he would have him, the senator returned this noble answer, that as he was a senator, it was fit he should be at the Senate, and if being there he were required to give his advice, he would speak freely that which his conscience commanded him. The emperor threatened then that he should die, to which he answered, Did I ever tell you that I was immortal? Do what you will, and I will do what I ought. It is in your power to put me to death unjustly, and in me to die constantly. Righteousness is a breastplate, and the cause of God will pay all your expenses. Let them tremble, whom danger finds out of the way of duty. Rule 9. Get your consciences sprinkled with the blood of Christ from all guilt, and that will set your hearts above all fear. It is guilt upon the conscience that softens our spirits and makes them cowardly. The righteous are bold as a lion. Proverbs chapter 28, verse 1. It was guilt in Cain's conscience that made him cry, "Everyone that meets me shall slay me." Genesis chapter 4, verse 14. A guilty conscience is more terrified with conceived dangers than a pure conscience is with real ones. A guilty sinner carries a witness against himself in his own bosom. It was guilty Herod who cried out, "John the Baptist is risen from the dead." Such a conscience is the devil's anvil, on which he fabricates all those swords and spears with which the guilty sinner pierces and wounds himself. Guilt is to danger what fire is to gunpowder. A man need not fear to walk among many barrels of powder if he has no fire about him. Rule 10. Exercise holy trust in times of great distress. Make it your business to trust God with your lives and comforts, and then your hearts will be at rest about them. So did David in Psalm 56, verse 3. At what time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. As if he should say, Lord, if at any time a storm rises, I will make bold to shelter me from it under the cover of thy wings. Go to God by acts of faith and trust, and never doubt but he will secure you. Isaiah chapter 26, verse 3. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee. God takes it well when you come to him thus. Father, my life, my liberty, and my estate are hunted after, and I cannot secure them. O let me leave them in thy hand. The poor leaves himself with thee. And does his God fail him? No. Thou art the helper of the fatherless. Psalm 10, verse 14. That is, God is the helper of the destitute one who has none to go to but God. And Psalm 112, verse 7 is a sweet scripture. He shall not be afraid of evil tidings. His heart is fixed, trusting in the Lord. He does not say that his ears shall be kept from the report of evil tidings. He may hear as sad tidings as other men, but his heart shall be kept from the terror of those tidings. His heart is fixed. Rule 11. Consult the honor of religion more, and your personal safety less. Do you think it honors religion when Christians are as timorous as hares and start at every sound? Will not this tempt the world to think that, whatever you talk, yet your principles are no better than other men's? Oh, what mischief may the discoveries of your fears before them do! It was a noble saying of Nehemiah, chapter 6, verse 11, Should such a man as I flee? And who, being as I am, would flee? Would it not be better that you should die than that the world should be prejudiced against Christ by your example? For alas, how apt is the world, who judges more by what they see in your practices than by what they understand of your principles, to conclude from your timorousness that however much you commend faith and talk of assurance, yet you dare trust those things no more than they when it comes to the trial. Oh, let not your fears lay such a stumbling block before the blind world. Rule 12. He who will secure his heart from fear must first secure the eternal interest of his soul in the hands of Jesus Christ. When this is done, then you may say, Now, world, do your worst. You will not be very solicitous about a vile body, when you are once assured it shall be well to all eternity with your precious souls. Christ said, Fear not them that can kill the body, and after that have no more fear that they can do. Luke chapter 12, verse 4. The assured Christian may smile with contempt upon all his enemies, and say, Is this the worst that you do? What say you, Christians? Are you assured that your souls are safe, that within a few moments of your dissolution they shall be received by Christ into an everlasting habitation? Well, if you are sure of that, never trouble yourselves about the instruments and means of your dissolution. Objection. Oh, but a violent death is terrible to nature. Answer. But what matter is it, when your soul is in heaven, whether it was let out at your mouth or at your throat? Whether your familiar friends or barbarous enemies stand about your dead body and close thine eyes? Alas, it is not worth making so much ado about. The body knows nothing in its muscles when the soul is in heaven. Your soul shall not be sensible in heaven how your body is used on earth. No, it shall be swallowed up in life. Rule 13. Learn to quench all slavish creature fears in the reverential fear of God. This is a cure by diversion. It is a rare piece of Christian wisdom to turn those passions of the soul which most predominate into spiritual channels, to turn natural anger into spiritual zeal, natural mirth into holy cheerfulness, and natural fear into a holy dread and awe of God. This method of cure Christ prescribed in the aforementioned passage, Luke chapter 12, verse 4, just as is stated in Isaiah chapter 8, verses 12 and 13. Fear not their fear. But how shall we help it? Why, sanctify the Lord of hosts himself, and let him be your fear and your dread. Natural fear may be allayed for the present by natural reason, or by the removal of the occasion, but then it is but like a candle blown out with a puff of breath, which is easily lit again. But if the fear of God extinguishes it, then it is like a candle quenched in water, which cannot easily be rekindled. Rule 14. Last, pour out those fears to God in prayer, which the devil and your own unbelief pour in upon you in times of danger. Prayer is the best outlet for fear. Where is the Christian who cannot give his approval to this direction? I will give you the greatest example in the world to encourage you in the use of it, even the example of Jesus Christ. Mark chapter 14, verse 32. When the hour of his danger and death drew nigh, he went into the garden, separated from the disciples, and there wrestled mightily with God in prayer, even unto an agony. In reference to this, the apostle says in Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong cries and tears to him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared. He was heard as to strength and support to carry him through it, though not as to deliverance or exemption from it. Now, oh, that these things might abide with you, and be reduced to practice in these evil days, that many trembling souls may be established by them. Season 5. The fifth season to excite this diligence in keeping the heart is a time of straits and outward pinching wants, although at such times we should complain to God and not of God. The throne of grace was erected for a time of need, as in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16. Yet when the waters of relief run low, and want begins to pinch hard, how prone are the best hearts to distrust the fountain. When the meal in the barrel and the oil in the cruse are almost spent, our faith and patience are almost spent too. Now it is difficult to keep down the proud and unbelieving heart in a holy quietness and sweet submission at the foot of God. It is an easy thing to talk of trusting God for daily bread, while we have a full barn or purse. But as the prophet says in Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 17, though the fig tree should not blossom, neither fruit be in the vine, yet will I rejoice in the Lord. Surely this is not easy. The fifth case therefore shall be this. Case 5. How a Christian may keep his heart from distrusting God or repining against him when outward wants are either felt or feared. This case deserves to be seriously pondered, and especially to be studied now, since it seems to be the design of Providence to empty the people of God of their creaturefulness, and acquaint them with those straits which hitherto they have been altogether strangers to. Now, to secure the heart from the aforementioned dangers attending this condition, these following considerations, through the blessing of the Spirit, may prove effectual. Consideration 1. If God reduces you to straits and necessities, yet he deals no otherwise therein with you than he has done with some of the choicest and holiest men who ever lived. Your condition is not unique. Though you have hitherto been strangers to wants, other saints have daily conversed and been familiarly acquainted with them. Hear what blessed Paul speaks not of himself only, but in the name of other saints reduced to like exigencies in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 11. Even to this present hour we both hunger and thirst, and are naked and buffeted, and have no certain dwelling place. To see such a man as Paul going up and down the world with a naked back and empty belly, and not a house to put his head in, one who was so far above you in grace and holiness, one who did more service for God in a day than perhaps you have done in all your days, and yet you repine as if harshly dealt with. Have you forgotten what necessities and straits even David suffered? How great were his straits and necessities! 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 8. Give, I pray thee, said he to Nabal, whatsoever cometh to thy hand to thy servants, and to thy son David. Renowned Musculus was forced to dig in the town ditch for a maintenance. Famous Henry Ainsworth, as I have been credibly informed, was forced to sell the bed he lay on to buy bread. But why speak I of these? Behold, a greater than any of them, even the Son of God, who is the heir of all things, and by whom the worlds were made. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 2. Yet sometimes would have been glad of anything, having nothing to eat. Mark chapter 11, verses 12 and 13. And on the morrow, when they were come from Bethany, he was hungry, and seeing a fig tree afar off, having leaves, he came, if perhaps he might find anything thereon. Well then, hereby God has set no mark of hatred upon you, neither can you infer the want of love from the want of bread. When your repining heart puts the question, was there ever any sorrow like mine, ask these worthies, and they will tell you that, though they did not complain and fret as you do, yet they were driven to as great straits as you are. Consideration 2. If God leaves you not in this necessitous condition without a promise, you have no reason to repine or despond under it. It is a sad condition indeed, to which no promise belongs. I remember that Calvin, writing on Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1, "Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation," solves the doubt in what sense the darkness of the captivity was not so great as the lesser incursions made by Tiglath-Pileser. In the captivity the city was destroyed and the temple burnt with fire, and here was no comparison in the affliction. But yet the darkness should not be such, and the reason Calvin gave was this: there was a certain promise made to this, but none to the other. It is better to be as low as hell with a promise than in paradise without one. Even the darkness of hell itself would be comparatively no darkness at all were there but a promise to enlighten it. Now God has left many sweet promises for the faith of his poor people to feed on in this condition. Psalm 34, verses 9 and 10. O fear the Lord, ye his saints, for there is no want to them that fear him. The lions do lack and suffer hunger, but they that fear the Lord shall want nothing that is good. Psalm 33, verses 18 and 19. The eye of the Lord is upon the righteous, to keep them alive in famine. Psalm 84, verse 11. No good thing will he withhold from them that walk uprightly. Romans chapter 8, verse 32. He that spared not his own Son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? Isaiah chapter 41, verse 17. When the poor and the needy seek water, and there is none, and their tongue faileth for thirst, I, the Lord, will hear them. I, the God of Israel, will not forsake them. Here you see first their extreme wants, water being put even for the necessities of life. Second, their certain relief. I, the Lord, will hear them, in which it is supposed that they cry unto him in their straits, and he hears their cry. Having therefore these promises, why should not your distrustful hearts conclude like David's in Psalm 23, verse 1? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Objection. But these promises imply conditions. If they were absolute, they would afford more satisfaction. Solution. Those tacit conditions you speak are simply these, that either he will supply or sanctify your wants, or that you shall have so much as God sees fit for you. And does this trouble you? Would you have the mercy whether sanctified or not? Whether God sees it fit for you or not? I think the appetites of saints after earthly things should not be so ravenous as to seize greedily upon any enjoyment, not caring how they have it. But oh, when wants pinch, and we see not whence supplies should come, then your faith in the promise shakes, and we, like murmuring Israel, cry, He gave bread, can he give water also? O unbelieving hearts, when did his promise fail? Whoever trusted them and was ashamed? May not God upbraid you with your unreasonable infidelity, as Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 31? Have I been a wilderness unto you? Or, as Christ said to the disciples, Since I was with you, lacked ye anything? Luke chapter 22, verse 35. Yes, may you not upbraid yourselves? May you not say with Polycarp, These many years I have served Christ, and found him a good master? Indeed, he may deny your wantonness, but not what your real wants call for. He will not regard the cry of your lusts, nor yet despise the cry of your faith. Though he will not indulge and humor your wanton appetites, yet he will not violate his own faithful promises. These promises are your best security for eternal life, and it is strange if they should not satisfy you for daily bread. Remember the words of the Lord, and solace your hearts with them amidst all your wants. It is said that Epicurus, in the dreadful fits of the cholera, often refreshed himself by calling to mind his inventions in philosophy. And Posidonius, the philosopher, in a great fit of kidney stones, solaced himself with discourses of moral duty, and when the pain twinged him, he would say, O pain, you do nothing. Though you are a little troublesome, I will never confess you to be evil. If upon such grounds as these they could support themselves under such grinding and racking pains, and even delude their diseases by them, how much more should the precious promises of God and the sweet experiences which have gone along step by step with them make you forget all your wants and comfort you in every strait. Consideration 3. If it is bad now, it might have been worse. Has God denied you the comforts of this life? He might have denied you Christ, peace, and pardon also, and then your case would have been woeful indeed. You know God has done so to millions in the world. How many such wretched objects may your eyes behold every day, who have no comfort in hand, no hope, who are miserable here, and will be so to eternity, who have a bitter cup and nothing to sweeten it, no, not so much as a hope that it will be better. But it is not so with you. Though you are poor in this world, yet you are rich in faith, and heirs of the kingdom which God hath promised. James chapter 2, verse 5. O learn to set spiritual riches over against temporal poverty. Balance all your present troubles with your spiritual privileges. Indeed, if God had denied your souls the robes of righteousness to clothe them, the hidden manna to feed them, and the heavenly mansions to receive them, if your souls were left destitute as well as your bodies, you might well be pensive. But this consideration has enough to bring the considering soul to rest under any outward strait. It was bravely said by Luther, when want began to pinch him, "Let us be contented with our hard fare, for do not we feast with angels upon Christ, the bread of life?" Paul said, "And blessed be God, who hath abounded to us in all spiritual blessings." Ephesians chapter 1, verse 3. Consideration 4. This affliction, though great, is not such an affliction, but God has far greater with which he chastises the dearly beloved of his soul in this world. And should he remove this and inflict those, you would account your present state a very comfortable state, and bless God to be as now you are. What think you, sirs? Should God remove your present troubles, supply all your outward wants, give you the desires of your hearts and creature comforts, but hide his face from you, shoot his arrows into your souls, and cause the venom of them to drink up your spirits? Should he leave you but a few days to the buffeting of Satan and his blasphemous injections? Should he hold your eyes but a few nights waking with horrors of conscience, tossing to and fro till the dawning of the day? Should he lead you through the chambers of death, show you the visions of darkness, and make his terrors set themselves in array against you? Then tell me if you would not count it a choice mercy to be back again in your former necessitous condition with peace of conscience, and count bread and water, with God's favor, a happy state. Oh, then, take heed of repining. Say not that God deals harshly with you, lest you provoke him to convince you, by your own sense and feeling, that he has worse rods than these for unsubmissive and forward children. Consideration 5. If it is bad now, it will be better shortly. Oh, keep your heart by that consideration. The meal in the barrel is almost spent. Well, be it so. Why should that trouble me, if I am almost beyond the need and use of all these things? Suppose a traveler has spent almost all his money, but a shilling or two. Well, says he, though my money is almost spent, yet my journey is almost finished too. I am near home, and then I shall be fully supplied. If there are no candles in the house, yet it is a comfort to think that it is almost day, and then there will be no need of candles. I am afraid, Christian, you misreckon yourself when you think your provision is almost spent, and that you have a great way to travel. You think you have many years to live, and nothing to live upon. It may not be half as many as you suppose. In this be confident. If your provision is spent, either fresh supplies are coming, though you see not from where, or you are nearer your journey's end than you reckon yourself to be. Despondent soul, does it become a man or woman who is traveling upon the road to the heavenly city, and has almost arrived there, who is within a few days' journey of his Father's house, where all his wants shall be supplied, to carry on thus about a little meat, drink, or clothes, which he fears he shall want by the way? It was a noble saying of the 40 martyrs, famous in the ecclesiastical story, that when turned out naked in a frosty night to be starved to death, with these words they comforted one another. The winter indeed is sharp and cold, but heaven is warm and comfortable. Here we shiver for cold, but Abraham's bosom will make amends for all. Objection 1. But I may die for want. Solution 1. Who ever did so? When were the righteous forsaken? Solution 2. If so, your journey is ended, and you are fully supplied. Objection. But I am not sure of that. Were I sure of heaven, it would be another matter. Solution. You are not sure of that? Then you have other matters to trouble yourselves about than these. I think these should be the least of all your cares. I do not find that souls perplexed and troubled about the want of Christ and pardoned of sin are usually very anxious or solicitous about these things. He who seriously puts such questions as these, "What shall I do to be saved? How shall I know my sin is pardoned?" does not usually trouble himself with, "What shall I eat? What shall I drink? Or wherewithal shall I be clothed?" Consideration 6. Does it become the children of such a father to distrust his all-sufficiency or repine at any of his dispensations? Do you well to question his care and love upon every new exigency? Say, have you not been ashamed of this formerly? Have not your father's seasonable provisions for you in former straits caused you to blush and made you resolve never to question his love and care any more? And yet, will you renew your unworthy suspicions of him again? Disingenuous child, reason thus with yourself. If I perish for want of what is good and needful for me, it must either be because my Father knows not my wants, or has not wherewith to supply them, or else regards not what becomes of me. Which of these shall I charge upon him? Not the first, for my Father knows what I have need of. Matthew chapter 6, verse 32. My condition is not hidden from him. Nor the second, for the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness of it. Psalm 24, verse 1. His name is God all-sufficient. Genesis chapter 17, verse 1. Not the last, for as a father pities his children, so the Lord pities them that fear him. Psalm 103, verse 13. The Lord is exceedingly pitiful and of tender mercy. James chapter 5, verse 11. He hears the young ravens when they cry. Job chapter 38, verse 41. And will he not hear me? Consider, said Christ, the fowls of the air. Matthew chapter 6, verse 26. Not the fowls at the door that are fed every day by hand, but the fowls of the air that have none to provide for them. Does he feed and clothe his enemies, and will he forget his children? He heard the very cry of Ishmael in distress. Genesis chapter 16, verse 7. O my unbelieving heart, do you yet doubt? Remember Hagar and the child. Consideration 7. Your poverty is not your sin, but your affliction only. If you have not brought it upon yourself by sinful means, and if it is but an affliction, it may be borne more easily for that. It is hard indeed to bear an affliction coming upon us as the fruit and punishment of sin. When men are under trouble upon that account, they often say, "Oh, if it were but a single affliction coming from the hand of God by way of trial, I could bear it. But I have brought it upon myself by sin. It comes as the punishment of sin. The marks of God's displeasure are upon it. It is the guilt within that troubles and galls more than the want without." But it is not so here, and therefore you have no reason to be cast down under it. Objection. But though there is no sting of guilt, yet this condition wants not other stings, as, first, the discredit of religion. I cannot comply with my engagements in the world, and thereby religion is like to suffer. Solution. It is well that you have a heart to discharge every duty, yet if God disables you by providence, it is no discredit to your profession because you do not do that which you cannot do, so long as it is your desire and endeavor to do what you can and ought to do. In this case, God's will is that lenience and forbearance be exercised towards you. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 12 and 13. Objection. But it grieves me to behold the necessities of others, whom I was wont to relieve and refresh, but now cannot. Solution. If you cannot, it ceases to be your duty, and God accepts the drawing out of your soul to the hungry in compassion and your desire to help them, though you cannot draw forth a full purse to relieve and supply them. Objection. But I find such a condition to be full of temptations, a sore clog in the way to heaven. Solution. Every condition in the world has its clogs and attending temptations. Were you in a prosperous condition, you might there meet with more temptations and fewer advantages than you now have. For though, I confess, poverty has its temptations as well as prosperity, yet I am confident that prosperity has not these excellent advantages that poverty has. For here you have an opportunity to discover the sincerity of your love for God when you can live upon Him and find enough in Him and constantly follow Him, even when all external inducements and motives fail. And thus I have shown you how to keep your hearts from the temptations and dangers attending a poor and low condition in the world. When want pinches and the heart begins to sink, then improve and bless God for these helps to keep it. Season 6. The 6th season of expressing this diligence in keeping the heart is the season of duty. When we draw nigh to God in public, private, or secret duties, then it is time to look to the heart, for the vanity of the heart seldom discovers itself more than at such times. How often does the poor soul cry out, O Lord, how fain would I serve Thee, but vain thoughts will not let me. I came to open my heart to Thee, to delight my soul in communion with Thee, but my corruptions have set upon me. Lord, call off these vain thoughts, and suffer them not to prostitute the soul which is espoused to Thee before Thy face. The 6th case, then, is this. Case 6. How the heart may be kept from distractions by vain thoughts in the time of duty. There is a twofold distraction or wandering of the heart in duty. 1. Voluntary and habitual. Psalm 78, verse 8. They set not their hearts aright, and their spirit was not steadfast with God. This is the case of formalists, and proceeds from a want of a holy bent and inclination of the heart to God. Their hearts are under the power of their lust, and therefore it is no wonder that they go after their lust, even when they are about holy things. Ezekiel chapter 33, verse 31. 2. Involuntary and lamented distractions. Romans chapter 7, verses 21 through 24. I find then a law, that when I would do good, evil is present with me. O wretched man that I am! This proceeds not from the want of a holy bent and aim, but from the weakness and imperfection of grace. And in this case the soul may make the like complaint against its own corruptions that Abijah did against Jeroboam in 2 Chronicles chapter 13, verses 6 and 7. Yet Jeroboam the son of Nebat is risen up against his Lord, when Rehoboam was young and tender-hearted, and could not withstand him, and there are gathered unto him vain men, the children of Belial. Grace has dominion, but lusts are mutinous and seditious during the infancy thereof. But it is not my business to show you how these distractions come into the heart, but rather how to get and keep them out of the heart, in order whereunto, take these 10 following helps. Help 1. Sequester yourselves from all earthly employments, and set apart some time for solemn preparation to meet God in duty. You come reeking hot out of the world into God's presence, but you will find a tang of it in your duties. It is with the heart, which has a few minutes ago plunged in the world, and is now at the feet of God, just as it is with the sea after a storm, which still continues working, muddy and disquieted, though the wind is calm and the storm over. Your heart must have some time to settle. There are few musicians who can take down a lute or viol and play it without some time to tune. There are few Christians who can presently say, as in Psalm 57, verse 7, O God, my heart is fixed, it is fixed. Oh, when you go to God in any duty, take your heart aside and say, O my soul, I am now addressing myself to the greatest work that ever a creature was employed about. I am going into the awful presence of God about business of everlasting moment. O my soul, leave trifling now. Be composed, watchful, serious. This is no common work. It is God work, eternity work. I am now going forth bearing seed, which will bring forth fruit to life or death in the world to come. Pause a while upon your sins, wants, and troubles. Keep your thoughts a while on these before you address yourself to duty. David first mused and then spoke with his tongue. Psalm 39, verses 3 and 4. So Psalm 45, verse 1, my heart is preparing. Help 2. Having composed the heart by previous meditation, presently set a guard upon your senses. How often are poor Christians in danger of losing the eyes of their mind by those of their body? For this Job covenanted with his senses, Job chapter 31, verse 1. And for this David prayed in Psalm 119, verse 37, Turn away mine eyes from beholding vanity, and quicken thou me in thy way. This may serve to expound that mystical Arabian proverb which advises to shut the windows that the house may be light. It would be excellent if you could say in your outset upon duty, as a holy man once did when he came from duty, Be shut, O mine eyes, be shut, for it is impossible that you should ever see such beauty and glory in any creature as I have now seen in God. You need to avoid all occasions of distraction from without, for be sure you will meet enough from within. Intention of spirit in the work of God locks up the eye and ear against vanity. When Marcellus entered the gates of Syracuse, Archimedes was so intent about his mathematical scheme that he took no notice of soldiers when they entered his very study with drawn swords. A fervent heart cannot be a vagrant heart. Help 3. Beg God for a mortified fancy. A working fancy, said one, however much it is extolled among men, is a great snare to the soul unless it works in fellowship with the right reason and a sanctified heart. The fancy is a power of the soul placed between the senses and the understanding. It is that which first stirs itself in the soul, and by its motions the other powers are stirred. It is the common shop where thoughts are first forged and framed, and, as this is, so are they. If imaginations are not first cast down, it is impossible that every thought of the heart should be brought into obedience to Christ. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5. The fancy is naturally the wildest and most untamable power in the soul. Some Christians, especially such as are of hot and dry constitutions, have much to do with it. And truly, the more spiritual the heart, the more it is troubled about the vanity and wildness of it. Oh, what a sad thing it is that your nobler soul must lackey up and down after a vain and roving fancy, that such a beggar should ride on horseback and such a prince run after on foot, that it should call off the soul from attendance upon God when it is most sweetly engaged in communion with Him, to prosecute such vanities as it will start at such times before it. Beg God earnestly that the power of sanctification may once come upon it. Some Christians have attained such a degree of sanctification of their fancies that they have had much sweetness left upon their hearts by the spiritual workings of it in the night season. When your fancy is more mortified, your thoughts will be more orderly and fixed. Help 4. If you would keep your heart from those vain excursions, help yourself see by faith the holy and awful presence of God in duties. If the presence of a grave man will compose us to seriousness, how much more the presence of a holy God? Do you think that your soul would dare be so gay and light if the sense of a divine eye were upon it? Remember, the place where you are is the place of His feet. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 13. Act in faith upon the omniscience of God. All the churches shall know that I am He that searcheth the heart and trieth the reins, and I will give to every one of you according to your works. Revelation chapter 2, verse 23. All things are naked and open to the eyes of Him with whom we have to do. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12. Realize His infinite holiness. Into what a serious, composed frame did the sight of God in His holiness put the spirit of the prophet? Isaiah chapter 6, verse 5. Labor also to get upon your heart due apprehensions of the greatness of God, such as Abraham had in Genesis chapter 18, verse 27. I, who am but dust and ashes, have taken upon me to speak to God. And last, remember the jealousy of God, how tender He is over His worship. Leviticus chapter 10, verse 3. And Moses said to Aaron, This is it that the Lord spake, saying, I will be sanctified in them that come nigh me, and before all the people I will be glorified. Bernard said, A man who is praying should behave himself as if he were entering into the court of heaven, where he sees the Lord upon His throne, surrounded with 10,000 of His angels and saints ministering unto Him. When you come from a duty in which your heart has been toying and wandering, you may say, Verily, God was in this place, and I knew it not. Suppose all the impertinencies and vanities which have passed through your heart in duty were written out and interwoven with your petitions. Could you face God? Should your tongue but utter all the thoughts of your heart in prayer, would not men abhor you? Why, your thoughts are like words to God. Psalm 139, verse 2. If you were petitioning the King for your life, would it not provoke Him to see you playing with your band strings, or catching at every fly that lights upon your clothes, while you are speaking to Him about such serious matters? Oh, think sadly upon Psalm 89, verse 7. God is greatly to be feared in the assemblies of His saints, and to be had in reverence of all them that are round about Him. Why did God ascend in thunderings and lightnings and dark clouds upon Sinai? Exodus chapter 19, verses 16 through 18. Why did the mountains smoke under Him? The people quaked and trembled round about Him, yes, Moses himself not exempted. It was to teach the people that great truth of Hebrews chapter 12, verses 28 and 29. Let us have grace whereby we may serve Him acceptably, with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. Present God thus before you, and your vain heart will quickly be reduced to a more serious frame. Help 5. Maintain a praying frame of heart in the intervals of duty. What is the reason why our hearts are so dull, careless, and wandering when we come to hear or pray, but because there have been such long intermissions since our communion with God, by reason whereof the heart is out of a praying frame? If that spiritual warmth and those holy impressions we carry from God in one duty were but preserved to kindle another duty, it would be of marvelous advantage to keep the heart intent and serious with God. To this purpose, those intermediate ejaculations between stated and solemn duties are of most sweet and excellent use. By these our duty is, as it were, linked to another, and so the soul, as it were, wraps up itself in a chain of duties. That Christian seldom misses his mark in solemn duty who shoots up many darts in the intervals of duty. It is an excellent commendation that Christ bestows upon the spouse in Song of Solomon, chapter 4, verse 11. Thy lips, O my spouse, drop as the honeycomb. Upon this text, one commentator gives this sweet note. The honeycomb only actually drops sometimes, but it always hangs full of sweet drops ready to fall. If our ejaculations were greater, our lamentations upon this account would be fewer. Help 6. Endeavor to engage and raise your affections to God in duty, if you would have your distractions cured. A dropping eye and a melting heart are seldom troubled as others are upon this account. When the soul is intent upon any work, it gathers in its strength and bends all the thoughts about it, and when it is deeply affected, it will be intent. The affections command the thoughts to go after them. Deadness causes distraction, and distraction increases deadness. Could you but look upon your duties as the galleries of communion in which you walk with God, where your souls may be filled with those ravishing and matchless delights that are in His presence, your soul would not offer to stir from thence. It is with the heart in duty, as it is with those who dig for gold ore. They try here, and finding none, try there, and so go from place to place, till at last they hit upon the rich vein, and there they sit down. If your heart could but once hit the rich vein in duty, it would dwell and abide there with delight and constancy. Oh, how I love thy law! It is my meditation day and night. Psalm 119, verse 97. The soul could dwell day and night upon its knees once its delights, loves, and desires are engaged. What is the reason why your hearts are so shuffling, especially in secret duties? Why are you ready to be gone almost as soon as you come into the presence of God? Is it not because your affections are not engaged? Help 7. Mourn over the matter to God, and call in assistance from heaven, when vain thoughts assault your heart in duty. When the messenger of Satan buffeted Paul by wicked injections, as is supposed, he went to God and mourned over it before Him. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 8. Never slight wandering thoughts in duty as small matters. Follow every vain thought with a deep sigh, turning to God with such words as these. Lord, I came here to speak with Thee, and here a busy devil and a vain heart conspiring together have set upon me. O my God, what a heart have I! Shall I never wait upon Thee without distraction? When shall I enjoy an hour of free communion with Thee? Help me, my God, this once. Do but display Thy glory before mine eye, and my heart shall quickly be recovered. Thou knowest I came here to enjoy Thee, and shall I go away without Thee? See how the heart of Thy poor child works towards Thee, strives to get near Thee, but cannot. My heart is aground. Come, Thou north wind, blow, south wind. Oh, for a fresh gale now from Thy Spirit to set my affections afloat. Could you but thus affectionately bewail your distractions to God, you might obtain help and deliverance from them. He would say to Satan and your imperious lusts, as Ahasuerus said of Haman, What, will he force the queen before my face? Who are these who set upon my child in my work and presence? Help 8. Look upon the success and sweetness of your duties as very much depending upon keeping your heart close with God in them. These two things, the success and sweetness of duty, are as dear to a Christian as his 2 eyes, and both of these must necessarily be lost if the heart is lost in duty. Job chapter 35, verse 13. Surely God heareth not vanity, neither doth the Almighty regard it. The promise is made to a heart engaged. Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 13. Then shall ye seek me, and find me, when ye shall search for me with all your hearts. Well then, when you find your heart under the power of deadness and distraction, say to your soul, Oh, what do I lose by a careless heart now? My praying times are the choicest parts, the golden spots of all my time. Could I but stir up this heart with God, I might now obtain such mercies as would be matter for a song to all eternity. Help 9. Look upon it as a great evidence of the sincerity or hypocrisy of your hearts, according as you find them careful or careless in this matter. Nothing will startle an upright heart more than this. What? Shall I give way to a customary wandering of heart from God? Shall the spot of the hypocrite appear upon my soul? They indeed can drudge on in the round of duty, never regarding the frames of their hearts. Ezekiel chapter 33, verses 31 and 32. But shall I do so? When men come into the presence chamber, and the king is not there, they bow to the empty chair. Oh, never let me be satisfied with empty duties. Never let me take my leave of a duty until my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Help 10. Last, it will be of special use in keeping your heart with God in duties to consider what influence all your duties have on your eternity. These are your seed times, and what you sow in your duties in this world, you must look to reap the fruits of in another world. Galatians chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. If you sow to the flesh, of that you shall reap corruption. But if to the Spirit, life everlasting. O my soul, answer seriously. Would you be willing to reap the fruit of vanity in the world to come? Dare you say, when your thoughts are roving to the ends of the earth in duty, when you scarcely mind what you say or hear, Now, Lord, I am sowing to the Spirit. Now I am providing and laying up for eternity. Now I am seeking for glory, honor, and immortality. Now I am striving to enter in at the strait gate. Now I am taking the kingdom of heaven by a holy violence. Oh, such a consideration as this would make the multitudes of vain thoughts that press in upon the heart in duty fly 7 ways before it. And thus I have shown you how to keep your hearts in times of duty. Season 7. The 7th season, calling for more than common diligence to keep the heart, is when we receive injuries and abuses from men. Such is the depravity and corruption of man in his collapsed state, that one man has become a wolf or a tiger to another. They are, as the prophet complains in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 14, as the fishes of the sea, and as the creeping things that have no ruler over them. As wicked men are cruel and oppressive to one another, so they conspire together to abuse and wrong the people of God. The same prophet complains in verse 13, The wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he. Now, when we are thus abused and wronged, it is hard to keep the heart from vengeful motions, to make the heart meekly and quietly to commit the cause to him who judges righteously, to exercise no other affection but pity towards those who abuse us. Surely the spirit that is in us lusts for revenge, but it must not be so. You have choice helps in the gospel to keep down your hearts from such sinful motions against your enemies, and to sweeten your embittered spirits. The 7th case, then, shall be this. Case 7. How a Christian may keep his heart from vengeful motions under the greatest injuries and abuses from men. The gospel, indeed, allows a liberty to vindicate our innocence and assert our rights, but not to vent our corruptions and invade God's right. When therefore you find your heart beginning to be inflamed by vengeful motions, presently apply the following remedies. Remedy 1. Urge upon your heart the severe prohibitions of revenge by the law of God. Remember that this is forbidden fruit, however pleasant and luscious it is to our vitiated appetites. Oh, says nature, revenge is sweet. Oh, but, says God, the effects thereof shall be bitter. How plainly has God interdicted this flesh-pleasing sin. Proverbs 20, verse 22. Say not, I will recompense evil. Proverbs 24, verse 29. Say not, I will do so to him as he hath done to me. Romans chapter 12, verse 17. Recompense to no man evil for evil. And verse 19. Avenge not yourselves, but rather give no place to wrath. No, that is not all. Proverbs chapter 25, verse 21. If thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. The word feed him, as critics observe, signifies to feed cheerfully and tenderly, as birds do their young ones. The Scripture is a great friend to the peace and tranquility of human society, which can never be preserved if revenge is not deposed. It was an argument urged by the Christians to prove their religion to be supernatural and pure that it forbids revenge, which is so sweet to nature, and verily it is 1,000 pities such an argument should be lost. Well then, awe your hearts with the authority of God in these Scriptures, and when carnal reason says, "My enemy deserves to be hated," let conscience reply, "But does God deserve to be disobeyed? Thus and thus has he done, and so he has wronged me. But what has God done that I should wrong him? If he dares be so bold as to break the peace, shall I be so wicked as to break the precept? If he fears not to wrong me, shall not I fear to wrong God? Oh, let the fear of God's threatenings repress such sinful motions. Remedy 2. Set before your eyes the most eminent patterns of meekness and forgiveness, that your souls may fall in love with them. This is the way to cut off those common pleas of the flesh for revenge, such as, "No man would bear such an affront." Yes, such and such have borne as bad and worse. Or, "I shall be reckoned a coward, a fool, if I pass by this." No matter, as long as I follow the example of the wisest and holiest of men, and never did any carry it more peaceably and forgivingly. Isaiah chapter 53, verse 7. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was brought as a lamb to the slaughter. The apostle sets this pattern of our Lord before you for your imitation. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 21 through 23. For even hereunto are you called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that we should follow his steps. When he was reviled, he reviled not again. When he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him that judgeth righteously. To be of a meek, forgiving spirit is Christ-like, God-like. Then shall you be the children of your Father which is in heaven, for he maketh his sun to rise upon the evil and upon the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. Matthew chapter 5, verse 45. How eminently also did the Spirit of Christ rest upon his apostles. Never were there such men upon earth for true excellency of spirit. None were ever abused more, or suffered their abuses better. They said, "Being reviled, we bless. Being persecuted, we suffer it. Being defamed, we entreat." 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. Mr. Calvin, though a man of a quick spirit, yet hath attained such a degree of this Christ-like forgiveness, that when Luther had used some opprobrious language of him, the good man said no more but this: "Although he should call me a devil, yet will I acknowledge him to be an eminent servant of Jesus Christ." I have often heard it reported of holy Mr. John Dodd that, when one was enraged at his precise, convincing doctrine, and picked a quarrel with him, smote him on the face, and knocked out 2 of his teeth, this meek servant of Christ spit out the teeth and blood into his hand, and said, "See here, you have knocked out 2 of my teeth, and that without any just provocation. But on the condition that I might do your soul good, I would give you leave to knock out all the rest." Here is the excellency of a Christian's spirit above all the attainments of moral heathens. Though the heathens were excellent in many other things, yet they could never attain this forgiving spirit. Tertullian said, "It is the first office of justice to hurt no one, unless first provoked by an injury." Whereupon Lactantius said, "What a dainty sentence was spoiled by the orator in adding those last words." Strive, then, for this excellency of spirit, which is the proper excellency of Christians. Do some singular thing that others cannot do, and then you will have a testimony in their consciences. When Moses outdid the magicians, they were forced to confess the finger of God in that business.